I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. The second round of the Trump administration's Liberation Day tariffs have now taken effect. All nations that trade with the US were hit with a baseline 10% tariff this afternoon, while China's retaliatory measures have seen it hit with a total of 104% tariffs. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the levies on Australia aren't appropriate or reciprocal. Will we be able to make progress on negotiations before the election? I'll ask the Industry and Science Minister Ed Husic live in a moment. The Coalition has released modelling of its East Coast gas reservation plan 2 weeks after the policy was announced. The modelling calculates household gas bills would fall by 7% and electricity bills would drop by around 3% under the Coalition's plan to reserve gas for domestic use. Are these figures credible? I'll ask the Coalition campaign spokesman James Paterson. And the Greens want negative gearing reforms back on the table in the event of a hung parliament in exchange for their support. Party leader Adam Bandt told the National Press Club the Greens would ask to limit negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount to mum and dad investors with one property. Could we see a housing policy overhaul in a minority government? Well, the Prime Minister has said he isn't interested. I'll ask my political panel. Starting today with that negative gearing demand from the Greens, Adam Bandt told the National Press Club that the economic shocks coming from Donald Trump's tariffs mean changes to negative gearing and capital gains are now a matter of housing, life and death.
Welcome interest rate cuts are on the cards, thankfully. But they will also be a magnet for property speculators unless we change these warped incentives now. The Greens' plan would see negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount scrapped for wealthy property investors, but preserved for what are often called mum and dad investors with one investment property.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese dismissed the Greens' suggestion in the event of a minority government, saying these policy suggestions are not new.
Well, Adam Bandt's trying to make himself relevant, and I don't blame him for that. That's up to him. All these minor parties will try to do that. I'm a member of a party of government, and I sit with this fine friend of mine here in a cabinet room that makes decisions. We will, I expect, to be re-elected as a member for Grain. I'm not taking that for granted. I was in Grainley yesterday with all of you. There's nothing new about the Greens talking themselves up, because sometimes the media follow that up for whatever reason. It makes things a bit more interesting.
Well, it has made things a bit more interesting. The Greens leader Adam Bandt claims Anthony Albanese can't win a majority outright and that he will be forced to cooperate with the crossbench and the Greens after the election. Just to be clear, not a single vote has been cast yet. So while the Greens and the minor parties position for what they might want to achieve in the next parliament, voters still haven't made their minds up about the kind of parliament they want to deliver. And of course, any party can still win majority. We don't know. Voting hasn't started. Adam Bandt has tried to reassure voters, though, that the Greens would not go after existing mum and dad investors in the event of a hung parliament. He too wants to make sure he doesn't overly scare people as he makes this announcement. So having announced the party's plan to put negative gearing reforms and capital gains tax back on the table if it is successful, the Greens leader has said that people with one existing investment property wouldn't be impacted. Now, as you saw there, the Prime Minister shut down this idea straight away. He knows the Coalition wants to campaign on the idea of the Greens making Labor embrace these ideas that he thinks the public doesn't want. Now, I asked him just a couple of weeks ago about that on this show. He said the public had decided in 2019 that it wasn't interested in this. He talks about them as old ideas, but of course, an idea continues to percolate as long as politicians keep talking about it, and the Greens seem not to want to let this one go away. Well, returning to tariffs, in Washington overnight, the US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer faced fierce questioning from Democrat senators over Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs. One senator focused on Australia, pointing out our close national security relationship. Greer said that the US was running up the score on Australia. That's a sport analogy meaning to score more while you're already ahead. Let's take a listen.
Australia got hit with a 10% tariff as well.
Senator, Australia has the lowest rate available under the new program. They ban imports of American beef.
Ambassador, excuse me. There is a trade. We already have a free trade agreement. We have a trade surplus. So getting the least bad, why did they get whacked in the first place?
We're addressing the $1.2 trillion deficit, the largest in human history that President Biden left us with. We should be running up the score in Australia.
Ambassador Greer, answer the question on Australia. We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are an incredibly important national security partner. Why were they whacked with a tariff?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork. They're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
With your Greek letter formula, the fact that we have a trade surplus.
Well, someone's got our back there. To get the Australian government's response to all of that, let's bring in the Industry and Science Minister, Ed Husic. Minister, welcome.
How are you?
Well, what did you think of that?
Well, no, I reckon I might see if I can get an honorary Order of Australia for Senator Warner. Good on him. I like the cut of his jib.
It was very defensive of Australia, but we heard the actual administration's perspective running up the score against us. What did you make of it?
Well, I think, Senator Warner rightly pointed out in terms of the trade surplus that we have, the close relationship that we have, that our two countries have worked together. I've spoken about this with your good self recently. On the basis of fact or friendship, you wouldn't have made the calls from the US perspective against our country. And I think it is important that that type of message is raised in Washington by people in Congress that recognise the nature of the relationship between the US and Australia. So I think it is very important. And I again, go back to the point in terms of the trade surplus and the imposition of these tariffs and what it might do in terms of the broader global trade environment. I think this is enormously counterproductive and not in anyone's interest. Everyone will lose from what the Trump administration is doing here. It is senseless and counterproductive.
But we have a little hint now as to what they're trying to achieve with us, Minister, which is running up the score. We know what that sporting analogy means. I enjoy it when I see Collingwood do it, but I'm not so sure I'm happy to see the US do it. I think our viewers would feel the same way. So how should we respond if they think they're running up the score?
Well, as a Sydney-sider, I always love AFL references. But I think the bigger, more substantive thing is to not be engaged in further action against a friend like Australia. And more broadly, as is being pointed out in the US has benefited largely from a system where these type of tariffs haven't been imposed. From the earnings of workers to the economic growth of the US, you have seen the way that the US has gone relative to others. For example, in the Eurozone, I think it's probably double the growth rate of the Eurozone. That is all, obviously, that the US is making a call about what they want to do in terms of their economic performance and in terms of wages, and we'll see how that plays out.
Donald Trump suggested earlier today, Ed Husic, that the pharmaceutical imports to the US, that includes almost $2 billion from Australia, are likely to be hit with tariffs. What's your response?
Well, we have said, you've heard directly from the Prime Minister, this is a red line from us. We will stand up for the PBS. It is important that people get access to affordable medicines. The PBS has helped deliver that over the years. The other point worth making is that if the US administration thinks by doing this that they'll bring back more manufacturing, there are only a few companies, pharmaceutical companies, that actually manufacture in this country. And I don't think, off the top of my head, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I reckon I'm pretty close to the mark here, there is probably no US pharmaceutical company that is manufacturing in large volume in this country. We have set up a deal with Moderna to do mRNA manufacture, but again, that was a deal that they entered into with the Australian government where there was an exchange in return in terms of the money that was extended to them to build that mRNA manufacturing facility in Melbourne.
Are there implications for that Moderna deal?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. So how do we stop them imposing this tariff on us? That we couldn't stop the last one. There are constant questions, as you know, to the Prime Minister about talks with Donald Trump or his administration. How do we stop the next one?
Look, the way to look at it is this. I mean, everyone has seen this. Everyone has seen that these tariffs have been imposed by the US almost unilaterally on so many different countries. The key for us is to think ahead as a nation. It is why you saw the Prime Minister announce last week an economic resilience package, including, I might add, in my portfolio area, a $1 billion manufacturing retooling fund, and part of that economic resilience fund to help our manufacturers change over their equipment, improve their productivity, stand us in good stead in terms of exports. I've also taken the step of asking the Anti-Dumping Commission to take a much closer look at the prospect of material being dumped in Australia in an effort to sidestep the impact of the tariffs as well. We have said as a government we will take steps to build a stronger economy in the face of global uncertainty, and you'll expect that to continue. No point speculating on where else, what other tariffs, where they're going to do, what they're going to go, how they're going to behave in terms of the US. You can see that they're just these things will just continue. We have to be prepared, and that's what we're doing as a government.
Can you tell me any more about the critical minerals reserve that the Prime Minister announced? It's been pretty light on details. Often there's a lot of criticism I've heard from your side about the Coalition's lack of details. We don't know a lot about how that critical minerals reserve would work. Is it about the US and enticing them, or is it about something else?
I think we recognise as a government that we as a nation possess one of the greatest stores of critical minerals on the planet. We have said early, well beyond or well before all this, that we believe that the key for us was value add. How do we use those critical minerals in the national interest and get more out of what we have from there, and making sure that they're available for the nation, and also working with reliable partners in being able to meet mutually beneficial goals. So we think it is important to think ahead, and that's why we're looking at these type of measures. I
want to change the topic and talk about gas. Today, the Coalition has announced the gas security charge. It's proposing it would, and we've got some of the figures around it, it would cut industrial gas bills by 15% and residential gas bills for households by 7%. That's what the modelling has found. Isn't that a good outcome for people's bills, both in manufacturing but also at a household level?
Placing a lot of store in the Coalition being able to stick to its policy. I mean, it doesn't take them long to backtrack. And, you know, I mean, policy cordial offerings that will wait just to be watered down by the Coalition at some point, they're not really going to stand by them. So I think you have to take what they're saying very sceptically. When it comes to gas, I just got to say, Peter Dutton's hot air. I mean, he's a fake and a flake on this stuff. When we needed him to stand with us to cap gas prices back in 2022, he didn't do what Labor and Liberal premiers at the time did, regardless of politics, and that is stand with the Australian government to make sure we delivered lower prices. The only person who opposed us, Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party. And this guy is suggesting, Peter Dutton, that he will stare down gas companies when he says he's going to take their gas off them. I mean, this bloke will flake in a moment and will not deliver.
OK, let me challenge you.
I genuinely do not think. I think this on gas, he is a fake and a flake.
OK, you're asking our viewers and voters to think more broadly that they can't stick to the policy, but the policy itself, it's already been rebuked by the big gas firms. They obviously feel pretty nervous about what this looks like, and the Coalition is saying, well, no, you have to reserve more gas for the domestic market and charge Australians less. Isn't that, on principle, a good idea?
I don't believe them. I don't believe the coalition.
But isn't it on
follow...
principle?
Well,
that's not the question.
You asked me a question. If you don't mind me answering it,
no, politely, you're saying you don't believe that they'll execute. But
so,
the idea
you didn't
itself...
like my answer, so you just jumped in and talked over the top of me.
I want to direct you in the right direction, which is the concept.
I'm directing in my direction.
The concept. I want you to deal with the concept.
No, because, well, I've spoken very strongly in times past on gas. I believe that Australian gas is for Australians. I believe that we should take a stand where we have to, and we did. The reason I just don't believe Peter Dutton is because, one, in government, they never took stands on this issue in any firm sense, and in opposition, when they had a chance to show their strength of conviction and to work in the national interest with us, they refused to. They preferred to chuck rocks than be cooperative. And so from my point of view, I don't believe them. And I'm not asking anyone to believe anything other than what their lived experience is when it comes to the coalition. The coalition can't even have a policy that they take into the election, survive a couple of days before they change it. And I don't think on something as big as gas that they'll follow through. And if the gas companies are already stirring on the basis of policy, I can bet you any money Peter Dutton will flake the minute the pressure is put on him. And he will, if he's got a choice between backing Australian workers and multinational gas companies, I know which side he'll pick.
OK. I've spoken to experts because I'm not an expert. And Tony Wood, who is clearly an expert on energy, says the $12 price cap that your government set has not worked. There's all these exemptions, and there are a lot of exemptions that have been given. Should you get rid of the exemptions? Should you try and drive it down lower?
Well, with the greatest respect to Tony Wood, and I do genuinely respect the bloke, when we brought the cap in, it was as a result of Treasury forecasting around the likely movement of gas prices and electricity prices into 2023 and 24. And what it became very clear in the middle of 23 is that we had shielded, in particular manufacturers, from the worst of the price rises that were expected. So from our point of view, they did the job, and they did the job without any support from the coalition. Though we did work, and it's not a political point I'm making, insofar as Liberal and Labor premiers worked with the Australian government, with the Albanese government, to make sure this was a reality. Now, in terms of exemptions, what we said as part of the mandatory code is that if we had gas producers who could show that they were going to dedicate parts of their supply to Australian households and business, that they could get an exemption from the gas price. And it wouldn't be something that would allow them to charge well in excess of the cap. In some cases, it's been around $14, $15. And that has ensured that we could, for example, put more in terms of gas supply into the system. I mean, it's delivered. So I understand, Tony Wood will make his case, but I think I can point to other elements that demonstrate the effectiveness of what we've done.
But wouldn't you like to drive it down lower, Minister?
I am always keen to explore ways in which we can do that.
Because right now the coalition says that they're going to drive it down lower. So that's the contest that people are currently looking at, right? And that's a contest that is difficult for your side of politics. You've been in government for 3 years. People have seen their energy bills go up. I know you've intervened, but perhaps people will assess that the intervention hasn't been enough.
The coalition says their policy will work, like they said that they were opposed to work from home. And what's their position now?
I will ask you one more question on another issue before I say goodbye to you.
Come on, this goes to the heart of believability, though, Patricia. I mean, before you move on, you put a point to me and I responded. And the point I'm making is you just can't believe that their positions will stick. They're changing. First, they're against Medicare, now they're for it. They were against work from home, now they're for it. They've never said anything. They oppose gas caps. Now they're saying that they'll take a strong stand on gas. I mean, please.
Just finally, Adam Bandt spoke today. He says that he wants to push for negative gearing and capital gains tax reform. If there's a minority government, they will try and use that leverage to push your government. Why not revisit those ideas? I mean, they are clearly... It's not 2019. I've heard that argument being used. It's many years later. The world's changed. There are a lot of young people who feel like the system is stacked against them. Why not revisit these ideas?
So I appreciate in the middle of an election there will be parties that put their case forward and the things that they want to do. Mr Bandt's put that that forward on behalf of his party. But when you ask me why not, why wouldn't we? It's simple. The Prime Minister has ruled it out. We aren't doing it. So from our point of view, it's the end of the story. We believe that in tackling housing affordability, the biggest thing we need to do is to be able to improve supply, increase supply. Now, Adam Bandt is saying he wants us to suddenly work with him on an idea that he's got around housing affordability, and yet held up in the Australian Parliament moves that we had to improve housing affordability simply because he wanted to team up with Peter Dutton and block us for an extended period of time. So you'll have to forgive me. I'm not necessarily rushing to embrace an idea that Adam Bandt has on housing affordability because he's decided now he wants to make it a priority when we needed him and he could have helped and we could have got things moving quicker. He really wasn't there.
Ed Husic, always great to speak to you. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise, thank you.
Staying with the Coalition's gas policy, the opposition released the long-awaited modelling of that gas policy today. That's 2 weeks after their gas reservation plan was announced. The opposition leader Peter Dutton says consumers will see a reduction in their gas prices by the end of this year.
Some of the big gas companies aren't happy, but I'm fighting for families and I'm fighting for small businesses and for bigger manufacturing businesses so that we can bring costs down across the economy. I want the price of steel to come down and the price of bricks to come down, and they can under our policy. So we do in the first 100 days speak to those companies and work our way through our plan. We decouple from the international price and we can see more gas coming into the system by the end of this calendar year, and that's when you'll start to see a reduction in those prices.
The Prime Minister rubbished the opposition's claims on their gas policy, claiming gas prices have come down under his Labor government.
I mean, these people think that the Australian public are like goldfish, that they don't remember. They went around at the time when they were in government, when 24 out of 28 coal-fired power stations announced their closure. They said they were going to have a gas-led recovery. Remember that? Josh Frydenberg, time after time after time, and nothing happened. All that happened was the gas prices reached $30 when we came to office. They're currently 13 to 14.
For more on this, I spoke to Tim Buckley, founder and director of Climate Energy Finance, who was attending the Smart Energy Conference in Sydney today, a short time ago. Tim Buckley, welcome to the program.
Patricia, thank you very much for having me.
Well, there's lots of reasons to talk about energy. One reason is we're focusing on it at the ABC, but also the opposition leader has released his modelling from Frontier Economics. You've been an energy economist for decades, so more broadly, we'll get into the details in a moment, but what do you make of the gas reservation policy and this idea of reserving some of it and setting a price?
Patricia, I actually think at face value, the policy is potentially perfect for helping put downward pressure on both domestic gas prices for industry, for consumers, and also because gas sets the price for the electricity sector a percentage of the time, it would also put downward pressure almost immediately in the electricity sector. So it could work very, very well for Australian consumers, and it had minimal cost to the multinational gas cartel that's been gouging us for a decade. But I will finish with my optimism by saying the devil is always in the detail, and unless this scheme is done effectively, we, the taxpayer, will end up getting shortchanged as per usual.
Okay, so the broad parameters you think are good, but some of the detail you're questioning. Is the modelling the coalition has delivered credible?
Well, again, it's an 18-page document, a pamphlet to some degree. It's got Frontier Economics modelling as the modellers of it. They are the same organisation that handed down eventually, after enormous pressure, the nuclear fantasy modelling. And the detail in that 18-page pamphlet is relatively limited, and I don't think it fully explains anywhere near how you're going to implement a gas reservation policy 10 years or 15 years after it should have been introduced. and how you're going to make sure that it actually delivers on the outcome that the opposition leader is promising with huge confidence, and yet the detail is really absent to a large degree. So I would say we would need to see a lot more robust policy, and we need to see it enacted, and it needs to see it implemented with courage and conviction. And at the end of the day, part of why my scepticism, who's the biggest funder of the LNP? The fossil fuel industry. So are they really going to bite the hand of their major donors? Now, I know both sides, both major parties take donations from the fossil fuel industry. It is a huge industry in Australia. It's got incumbency, but the devil is in the detail. And what we have seen, Patricia, is a number of policy support mechanisms that will immediately cost taxpayers. So there is $1 billion of funding, of government funding, for new gas pipelines and new gas reservations. And then there is a modification of the capacity investment scheme to make sure that gas-fired power plants get a capital subsidy. And then there's another opening up of the critical minerals facility. They're going to redefine methane as a critical mineral, and therefore they can tap into some of the Albanese government's $4 billion fund to develop critical minerals. So bottom line, I've just articulated 3 different measures that are all going to cost taxpayers a lot of money, and that's a sop to the industry that makes me very sceptical.
I understand scepticism over any policy that any political party delivers, especially during an election campaign. It needs to be rigorously analysed. So let me challenge you here. You say that they're funders of the fossil fuel industry, so you question whether they will do anything to bite the hand that feeds them. But they have. I mean, the Australian Energy Producers Chief Executive has said the report by Frontier Economics on price controls leaves many unanswered questions. She's described it as another heavy-handed intervention, will drive away investment and risk supply issues in the future. So the fossil fuel industry is pretty unhappy right now with the policy, and yet the coalition is standing by it. Doesn't that give you any comfort?
Well, if I took a gas lobbyist's word, I would have thought that's exactly the theatre they would want to do to back in their party of choice.
But do you really think this is a policy that they like?
I would... The idea that they are going to bring in a new export levy to ensure we get lower domestic gas prices is an excellent policy if it works. But I did start by saying they're offering $1 billion of capital subsidies for new gas pipelines that will last for 50 years. They're offering $300 million for the development of a strategic basin plan to dramatically ramp up exploration development of new gas. The gas industry will love that. They are offering up to access to a $4 billion critical minerals facility for more subsidies, and they're accessing the capacity investment scheme for more subsidies. So is the lobbyist for the methane gas cartel that's gouged us for a decade unhappy about any form of regulation? Of course. They would much rather be free to actually gouge us without any government oversight. But if the government is going to bring in a domestic gas reservation and it's going to deliver for Australians, let's bear in mind it will impact 16% of the gas sold by the gas cartel in Australia. We domestically only use 16% of all gas produced in Eastern Australia. 84% of the gas is exported. So they still, as Peter Dutton has said in his plan, they still get to make their whatever profits they can and what they're currently making on all of the exports. What he's also offering is to expand the industry, which is something that the Albanese government's been a bit more reserved about, and which obviously the Teals and the Greens are diametrically opposed to, because when you're in a climate crisis, the last thing you want to do is keep digging the hole deeper. But at the end of the day, we did see Gina Rinehart's Senex come out and say this will have no material impact on their business in Eastern Australia. So if one of the biggest gas producers in Eastern Australia said it'll have no material impact, you've got to beware the theatre of a gas lobbyist actually feigning horror at this policy, because well, the devil is in the detail.
Okay.
Let's actually see it.
So in terms of reductions on prices, Tony Wood says, he's from the Grattan Institute, obviously very well known, and was on the channel a little earlier as well. He says for households, it's like a 3% reduction. That's like what, is that $50 a year potentially? What sort of reduction are we talking about?
Well, exactly. So Frontier Economics' own modelling, Tony is quoting that. They actually say it would have, on their estimates, on Frontier Economics modelling, it would reduce wholesale electricity prices by about 8%, and then with a lag, domestic energy consumers' retail price would drop by 3%. So as you said, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the thousands of dollars we pay. Whereas what I would highlight is that the Minister Bowen has articulated a $2.3 billion battery subsidy program. For the households that get access to that subsidy program, they will save $1,000 a year from that with immediate effect. So, yeah, $50 versus $1,000. And by the way, the $1,000 stacks with the $1,000 they're already saving on rooftop solar, and then they could save another $5,000 by adopting EVs, all of which the opposition party's against.
Let me put this to you. That question came up last night in the People's Forum where the leaders were answering questions. Peter Dutton addressed it on the basis of what he argues is an advantage to essentially the rich, that people who would take that up are people who are basically richer, and he doesn't think that's fair. What's your response to that? Because there is an uneven take-up of these sorts of programs.
Patricia, I actually agree with that statement. This is the $2.3 billion battery subsidy is middle-class welfare to some degree. It's going to have limited impact on renters, on apartment dwellers, on social housing. And I actually put that exact question to Minister Bowen this morning, and his response is we are concurrently introducing additional measures in alignment with the states to actually address those. You don't have one silver bullet. You actually need to introduce a multiple range of initiatives. This battery subsidy program will definitely materially benefit the household that gets the subsidy. And so that absolutely is middle-class welfare, because by definition, anyone who's renting doesn't own their own home. They don't have rooftop solar, and that's the prerequisite. But there is a flow-on benefit, and I really detest trickle-down economics, but that is partly what this will do. It will bring in millions of new batteries over the next 5 or 6 years. That will allow us to go from 25 gigawatts of rooftop solar in Australia today to potentially 50 gigawatts within 5 to 10 years, 100 gigawatts within 15 years, and bringing in an extra 75 gigawatts of new solar capacity will put downward pressure permanently on the price of power during the day, and then the batteries will allow that solar power, that low-cost, zero-emissions power, to be time-shifted in the evening peak. And by definition, if I have rooftop solar and I have a battery, I am not demanding power from the grid in the evening, and our price-only market for electricity is in 5-minute intervals. We pay exorbitant prices in the evening peak when the sun's already gone down. So if we can reduce demand in the evening peak, that will lower the price for everyone. But that is somewhat trickle-down economics. There will be a benefit to everyone, but the household who gets the 30% subsidy will get the majority of the benefit without doubt. So Minister Bowen directly answered that in full this morning and said there will be additional policies for renters, there will be additional policies for apartment dwellers, there will be additional investment in social housing. And he's already made significant progress in that, but there will be one size does not fit all. So I accept this is a good step forward. It will dramatically increase supply of electricity. It will time shift our electricity to the evening peak, and that will benefit everyone. But it's only one of a multiple number of initiatives to permanently solve an energy and climate and cost of living crisis.
Tim, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patricia.
Let's bring in the Shadow Home Affairs Minister and Coalition Campaign spokesperson James Paterson to get a response to all of these issues. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
Now, the leader, Peter Dutton, and the Shadow Minister, Ted O'Brien, are actually giving what look like to me conflicting accounts of when households will see the full benefit of the gas price reduction. Peter Dutton said this calendar year. Ted O'Brien this morning made it sound like it was well into next year. Can you clarify when we will see a reduction?
Patricia, we can't fix the damage that the Labor Party has done to our energy system over the last 3 years just overnight. Australians faced up to 34% increases for household gas and 32% increases for electricity, and that will take time to unwind. But the benefits will start to flow initially as soon as the policy is introduced. We'll be sitting down with the gas companies early on, after we're elected, if we're successful at the election, to make it very clear we expect them to supply the domestic market. We'll introduce the legislation as soon as it can be drafted to drive that gas back into the domestic market, and benefits will start to flow, but they won't all come straight away because in the case of industrial users, for example, some of them sign on to contracts that go for a couple of years. As those contracts expire, they'll be able to negotiate lower prices as a result of our policy.
So when you say benefits will start flowing, can you clarify what benefits flowing actually looks like for a household? Like, does that mean by the end of this year you think that you can reduce prices for households?
Well, as we've set out in the document that's been released today by Danny Price from Frontier Economics, who's one of the most preeminent energy economists in Australia, who's been commissioned by Labor and Liberal governments alike to do it, we believe that the impact on household electricity prices will be about 3%. But of course, gas is used for many more things than just electricity. It's used by households to heat their homes and to deliver hot water and other things. It's also very heavily used by industry, and household gas prices we think will fall by 7%, and of course industry prices we think will fall by 15% based on this modelling.
But when will that happen? I still don't feel like I know when.
Sure, Patricia, I can't give you the exact start date to the precise day, but as soon as we sit down with gas companies, we'll make it clear to them that we expect them to drive that gas into the domestic market. And what Danny Price and Frontier Economics have said is that that will reduce the wholesale gas price by about 23%. That's the $14 a gigajoule down to $10 a gigajoule figure. And that will have flow-on effects straight away into those contracts. And over time, households will benefit from that, just as industry will benefit from that. And we're not pretending we can flick a switch. We're not pretending we can fix this straight away. We don't have godlike powers. We can't fix it on day one. Labor has done a lot of damage to our energy system, but we'll start to work straight away and the benefits will flow throughout our first term.
So people might not see any impact this year.
No, I think they will see an impact. I think they will see the opposite of what they've seen on the Labor Party's watch. They won't see their gas prices rising by 34%. That won't happen. Gas prices will be down under us through this policy. Because what we're doing, Patricia, I think it's really important for your viewers to understand, is we're decoupling the Australian gas market on the East Coast from the international market. The reason why that's important is the international market is hugely variable. We saw that with the outbreak in the war in Ukraine. It drove gas prices up spectacularly, and Australian gas prices, which were linked to that international gas price, also went up, and that hurt households and it hurt businesses. We're going to de-link the two. We're going to force that supply into the domestic market, so we have a domestic price of about $10 a gigajoule, which is substantially better than what we have now.
So for households, it's like a 3% reduction. That sounds like about $50 a year. This is according to Tony Wood, who's looked at these numbers. So that's like a reduction of like $1 a week. That's not very much, is it?
Well, let's cast our mind forward and imagine what would happen if the Albanese government is re-elected, especially if they're re-elected with their coalition partners in the Greens and the Teals. The 34% increase that we've seen over the last 3 years of gas prices on their watch, or the 32% rise in electricity prices, which for some families means up to $1,300 more than Labor promised that they would pay for electricity. Imagine how much more it will increase in their second term if they're successful. What we're saying is that we can bring down prices, and I think many Australians, frankly, would just be happy to know that prices aren't going to rise further, let alone that there could be any potential reduction in prices.
You've mocked the idea of like not very much money in the tax cuts, but you think $1 a week in a gas price reduction for a household is enough?
Well, Patricia, I'm not sure what else you're suggesting that we do here.
I have no other suggestions. I'm just trying to interrogate the idea of what is of benefit to households, because the coalition has suggested that the tax cuts that the government has legislated now are not very appealing, or they won't do very much. but you reckon $1 a week for gas price reductions are appealing?
Well, you don't have to take my word for it. That's what Australians are saying. I mean, I've seen 100 Vox Pops screened on the news over the last couple of weeks of Australians saying 70 cents a day in 15 months' time is not going to help them, and certainly not going to help them as much as our petrol tax cut will help them, which could be $14 a week for someone who fills up their tank once a week. It could be up to $30 a week if you're a two-car household and you're filling up twice a week. So we've got immediate relief that'll be tangible. It'll be far bigger than Labor's tax cut in terms of petrol tax relief. And then over time, we'll drive lower prices through reduced gas prices and also by transitioning our energy system into a nuclear-powered emissions-free energy system, which has been independently costed at 44% cheaper than Labor's policy. So we've got short-term relief with petrol tax, we've got medium-term relief with gas policies, and we've got long-term plan for our energy system, which will make it emissions-free, which will make it reliable, and which will make it affordable.
The left-wing think tank, the Australia Institute, left-leaning, it's celebrating the news of what they have really called essentially, you know, an export tax. They say Economics 101 says governments should tax things we want less of. The energy producers' statement today says basically the same thing, that it will lead to less supply. So they're very different groups. They all think less supply will be the outcome here. Isn't that a risk?
We don't expect to collect any revenue from the charge that we would put on this, because we expect gas companies to comply with our policy intent, which is to drive 50 to 100 petajoules from that short-term spot market into the domestic Australian market, so we can bring the price down of gas by 23% according to the independent modelling that's been published. And at the same time, we'll facilitate further gas exploration and further gas exports by speeding up the approval time for gas projects, by investing in pipelines to make sure we can get the gas around the country to where it needs to be, and assist the industry to do more exploration for new gas that can be taken advantage of. So they're not in conflict at all, Patricia. We're both going to support the industry to find more gas, to utilise more gas, to export more gas, and we're also going to drive more gas into the domestic market because we want more supply, both to earn income for Australia and to reduce prices for Australians.
What does it feel like, as somebody who's always been on the right of politics, to have the left celebrating this policy like they are today?
Well, good policy earns support across the spectrum sometimes, Patricia. I heard your previous guest say that it was a perfect policy. He wasn't sure about our motivations.
He said a few other things too.
But he said it was a perfect policy. And we'll take that endorsement from wherever it comes, because we're not too concerned about the profitability of Australian gas companies. They're highly profitable.
Okay, but
we don't mind getting criticism from them.
Is your policy now more interventionist and more economically left-wing than Labor's?
I think that's kind of crude terminology, to be honest. I think what our policy is, it's putting Australians first. It's putting Australian gas for Australians before it's exported overseas. And I think that's a reasonable principle, because it's crazy, Patricia, that we're one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, that we have more gas reserves than many other countries in the world, but we export so much gas, and yet gas is unaffordable in our own country. It's driving people out of business. 29,000 businesses have closed over the last 3 years on this government's watch, partly due to higher energy prices, and it's hurting families who are struggling to heat their homes, who are struggling to power their homes. So we're very proud of this policy and very happy to defend it.
Let me put this to you then. Ed Husic and others I've heard today suggest that you will crumble when you get the heat from the gas companies, that you won't be able to stare them down. The suggestion actually from the other guest that you mentioned, who said it was a perfect policy, also said that you're funded by the fossil fuel companies, and ultimately, this is his claim, that you won't be able to stare them down if you were to become government. Would you stare them down even if they ran a campaign against you?
Well, it's very easy to question people's motivations basically like that, but I don't think Mr Buckley's think tank donors were disclosed as part of your interview. Understand that his think tank is chaired by Graham Wood, who made one of the largest political donations in Australian history to the Greens a number of years ago. He donated $1.68 million to the Greens. So anyone can make arguments like that. I think we should take people at face value and take them to be sincere. We are absolutely sincere about this policy. We will implement this policy. We are utterly determined to implement this policy, whatever criticism might come from gas companies. The people I'm least worried about in this debate is gas companies. They're extraordinarily profitable companies. They will continue to be very profitable companies, but we need to make sure we have enough gas in the Australian market so that Australians don't suffer from some of the highest prices that they've faced ever before.
Just quickly on something that's huge and affects our country enormously, Donald Trump suggested earlier today that pharmaceutical imports to the US, including almost $2 billion from Australia, are likely to be hit with tariffs. What's your response? How would you fight him on this?
Well, that would be very concerning if it was true. It would be double down on the wrong policy that the President has adopted with his tariffs so far towards Australia, which are completely unjustified. The President described them as reciprocal tariffs, but we have no tariffs on the United States. We have a great free trade agreement from the United States, and the President's policies are not consistent with that. I would hope that the President would recognise the damage that has been done by these policies so far to stock markets around the world and the troubling predictions of a recession in the United States or even globally and here in Australia, and recognise that this has not worked as intended and change course. He can set the trade policy for the United States, but I would say at least in respect to Australia it's completely unjustified and should be abandoned, and I would not welcome in any way any sort of tariff on pharmaceutical exports either.
One more comment that was made. I'm sure you've seen the footage. It's extraordinary. Donald Trump's comments come after his trade representative, Jamieson Greer, said the US should be, and I'm quoting, running up the score with Australia and using money generated by tariffs to address their broader deficit. I mean, they want to run up the score with us. What does that say about how they regard us more broadly?
Well, it'll be very hard to run up the score if you want to measure trade in this way, that a trade surplus is a good thing and a trade deficit is a bad thing. That's not how we approach trade. We think trade is mutually beneficial and that we have comparative areas of advantage, and some countries we have surpluses with and others we have deficits with, and it all works out in the wash. But even if you want to look at it that way, as he did in that Senate hearing, it's hard to see how much more you could run up the surplus with Australia, because they've had a very significant trade surplus with Australia for the best part of 70 years. We're a very reliable partner. We're not just a good economic partner through the free trade agreement, but we're also a very important security partner to the United States. And I think the President's approach is not justified with respect to Australia.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Patricia.
We can take you to Cairns now, where the Prime Minister has been speaking. We'll take you to the Prime Minister in a moment. He's been speaking, and of course we're bringing you, during this federal election campaign, these press conferences from the leaders as they address journalists as they crisscross around the country. Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese have already addressed the media today. Here's the Prime Minister.
Are such terrific advocates for good health policy in this community.
Thanks very much. I might just ask, if it's okay, if there are local journalists first, and then we'll go to...
Prime Minister, why not look at an alternative route through the tablelands from Cairns, given B-doubles can't use this road?
Because the advice that we have is that this is the most effective way. We take advice from the Queensland Government, and the advice is that this is a safety project that is an absolute priority.
Is there a recognition that after this work is done, though, that an alternative should be looked at?
Well, there's a recognition that we need to get this job done. This is a $490 million project. This is a very significant investment indeed. There's a recognition that 9,000 vehicles travel on this road every day. Around about 1,100 of those are heavy vehicles.
Does Cairns Airport's strategic location warrant a similar intervention to the Port of Darwin, given it's also for sale? And would you intervene in the sale of Cairns Airport to make sure it stays Australian-owned?
Well, Cairns Airport, of course, is an important asset. What has happened for most airports around Australia, including Darwin, is that superannuation funds have invested. So we want to see, wherever possible, governments only intervene in terms of ownership if there is market failure. So we'll await that process. If there is any bids, then there's a need to go through the Foreign Investment Review Board. I tell you what we're not doing is doing what the Commonwealth Government did under the former government, which is to provide a cash incentive to flog off assets. That's what occurred with Darwin Port, where $19.5 million was provided by Commonwealth taxpayers to the NT government as an incentive for them to flog that asset.
Just to be clear, this is a full knockdown rebuild. How long will this specific stretch of road be out of action for?
Look, we'll work with, of course, one of the things that the Commonwealth does is we're the funder. We'll work with the Queensland Government. I've spoken directly with Premier Crisafulli about the project, and they will, of course, manage the project. That's the way that infrastructure rollout occurs.
Prime Minister, we are in an area that has been LNP heartland for a long time. Does Labor intend to take it back? And also, do you have a message for Peter Dutton and his father tonight?
Well, firstly, on that, I spoke with Peter Dutton yesterday before the debate. I sought him out when I heard the news. We had a private discussion. I wished him well, and of course, I wish, and I'm sure all Australians wish his father well as well at this difficult time. Peter is obviously very busy campaigning, and that's understandable. But of course, our health and the health of our family members always comes first. Sorry, and then I didn't want to connect the two things.
That's okay. We're in an area that has been LNP heartland for a long time. Does Labor intend to take this back?
Well, I want to make this point. The only time the LNP have won this seat in the modern era is when Warren Entsch was the candidate. When he withdrew and wasn't the candidate, when he retired the first time, the Labor Party won the seat. He then recontested and won the seat. He's someone who has worked hard and is someone who's been welcome in my office a couple of times, making representations as any member of Parliament is. But his retirement and the replacement, frankly, with Jeremy Neal as the candidate, someone who wasn't supported in the pre-selection by Warren Entsch, is something that allows, I think, a greater opportunity for this bloke here, who is a local champion, who's a champion on the court for the Cairns Taipans, but importantly as well, he's a champion off the court. He's already delivering with $245 million for this project. He's delivering for roads, hospitals. Every school in this electorate, a public school, will get additional funding as a result of the deal that we've done. And his opponent, you know, is a shocker. His opponent, someone who at the campaign launch was handing out MAGA-inspired material. He's someone who has promoted anti-vax ideas during COVID. He's someone who's called for the complete defunding of the ABC, which is so vital in a community like this. When there are floods and natural disasters, the ABC plays a particular role in regional communities. He has said in an area that is dependent upon tourism, he has said that China is, to quote him, a grub of a country. Now, calling an entire country a grub of a country, direct quote, is just extraordinary. The difference is that I'm sure Matt, like myself for a long period of time, we want to see more tourists come from China as well as from Japan and from the region, from the United States, from the UK, from Europe, coming here from India with direct flights here and in and out of Cairns Airport. This bloke, it's hard to see how he'll attract economic activity for what is one of Australia's target markets. I mean, you know, there's a bit of talk today about gas from Peter Dutton. Well, you know, he doesn't need gas for his cookers. If he wants to find cookers, he can just look at his party room because it's full of it. He got rid of the Whitlam candidate. Now he's got another one who's got problems. This guy here is a shocker, and people shouldn't vote for him. You know, we need mainstream candidates. This bloke here will be a mainstream candidate for the Labor Party, and people of this electorate should vote for Matt Smith.
PM, since we last spoke, President Trump has also said that he's had world leaders on the phone to him, quote, kissing his ass. You haven't been one of them. Are you now vindicated for your decision not to pick up the phone and call him, as Peter Dutton has been requesting? And Matt Smith, do you think you've got Entsch's vote, or do you think it's your opponent who's got Entsch's vote on May 3?
Well, on the first term that you used, I haven't seen those comments from President Trump, but that's not the way that I deal with leaders. I deal as an equal with countries that I engage with. I had a discussion with Keir Starmer on Friday night. ideal, and I've dealt the two conversations I've had with President Trump, are ones in which I stand up for Australia's national interest, and I will always do that.
I caught up briefly with Warren this morning after a debate. We had a very pleasant chat. I've always liked Warren and got along with him well. I'm not going to speak on who he's going to vote for. That's a private matter between Warren and the ballot box, as it should be for everybody.
Did you ask him?
I did not.
Thanks.
You've bounced around answers on this question before, but can you just be really clear? Can you rule out any changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax?
Yes. How hard is it for the 50th time?
And will you rule
Just
out
here.
using
Just
these
here.
negotiating
Just
tools
here.
with the Greens in horse
To
trading
form a
votes?
government?
No, in horse trading for votes on other matters.
What are you talking about? Sorry.
If the Greens come to you and you need their vote to pass legislation, will you rule out changing negative gearing settings and capital gains tax?
Yes, and you might have noticed, I mean, you're a state correspondent, but let me explain. There are 25 votes we have in the Senate. In order to get legislation through, we're in that situation, have been in that situation for this entire term. We have stuck to our position. Let me explain the difference of what tax policy is in this country. Labor, Matt Smith, if you vote for him and he's part of a government, then we will give income tax cuts to you and to all 14 million Australians. If Peter Dutton wins, he will introduce legislation to increase the income tax of all Australians, all 14 million of them.
Prime Minister, will you be watching the debate tonight between Jim Chalmers and Angus Taylor? And given you won the debate last night, do you have any words of advice for the Treasurer on how to win?
Jim Chalmers doesn't need advice to debate Angus Taylor, with respect. Angus Taylor, I'm surprised he's making another appearance during the election campaign. One of the differences between the teams here, and I'm captain of our team, is I am proud that I don't have to play every position. This bloke's a fantastic health minister. The work that Nita Green has done in being the special envoy for the Great Barrier Reef, I've got a fantastic team across the board. Angus Taylor, I saw the interview that Angus Taylor had with Billy Fitzsimons. I did see that online during a flight, and my goodness, Billy Fitzsimons really towed up the facts that he got wrong. He said about inflation that it was rising and it's falling to 2.4%. He was wrong about wages. He was wrong about the surplus and the deficit, just as Peter Dutton was wrong last night when he purported to say that the budget was in balance at the time that the government changed. Let me remind everyone that under my government, in the last 3 years, people have been going through cost of living pressures like the rest of the world with global inflation. But inflation had a 6 in front of it. It's now down to 2.4. Employment has grown with more than 1 million jobs. Unemployment's at 4.1%. Real wages have increased. The last 5 quarters in a row, they went backwards. 5 quarters in a row when they were in office. Interest rates have started to come down. They started to rise before the last election, and we turned a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus, followed that up with a $15 billion surplus, and then this year have halved the anticipated deficit that was projected. That's my government's record, and I'm sure that Jim Chalmers will not only talk about that tonight, Jim Chalmers will also speak about our vision for future economic growth, for how we continue to take pressure off people through measures such as tax cuts.
Prime Minister, the Greens
Just
it's, as you said, it's an evolving situation, and you've spoken to Keir Starmer more recently than Donald Trump. Could you shed any light? Is Australia talking to the UK or the EU or any other jurisdictions about presenting some sort of united front in response to Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs?
I think that around the world you will have seen the comments that have been made. People understand that tariffs are an act of economic self-harm, that they impose a cost on the country that is imposing tariffs. Yeah.
Prime Minister, the Greens have been described by
Very
members of your cabinet.
Obsessed with the Greens.
Yeah, no, I've got a question.
You're a
about
bit
that.
obsessed. Well, I'm the Labor leader, by the way.
But they've been described by members of your cabinet as crazy, having thrown their lot in with thuggery and lacking relevance by you this morning. Given this, can you rule out that Labor will make preference deals with the Greens for the upcoming election?
Look, preference deals, I've been asked about it every day, very clearly. Those things are a matter for the organisational wing. What I'm responsible for is what the parliamentary party does. What we do is we will seek to be a majority government. We won't negotiate with the Greens before, during, after the election about those matters. I've been very clear about that. I've been clear about that for a decade, and I refer you to my previous 324 answers. Thanks very much.
Yeah, mate. Gotcha, mate.
The Trump administration's second round of hefty tariffs now in place, sending nations in search of solutions.